So welcome back, everybody. This is Paul again, and I'm continuing on my series about esoteric science and esoteric physics. And in case you missed my first broadcast, who am I? What my authority is? Nobody. I'm just a person. I've had a lot of observation in my life. I've studied metaphysics and meditated all my life, and just a curious person. And I put this content out there if people want to enjoy it, and maybe there's something that I say that relates to something that you understand. But I've been talking about esoteric teachings because they have been passed down to us for many thousands of years from many different sources. And there's a lot of consistency in them, and basically their idea in the end was about science and religion, and science and the word religion, let's say, has a lot of concepts, but let's say for science and mysticism and introspection and inward realization has been connected for a long, long time. And the ancient people that we learn teachings from India and many places in the world, Egypt and so on, they've come down to us. People like Thoth and ancient Egypt and Patanjali and so on from India and so on. But basically there's a oneness concept that this universe is one unit and is one being, and whatever it is so vast it's hard for us to comprehend it. So for our little mind to just say, there is a God or not a God, well, we're like a little bit of a, we're a speck of sand here, so we have to do a little bit of introspection and understand where the root of our own awareness is. And I spoke about that in a previous segment here. So I want to get into like a little bit more of what the esoteric, basically the idea is as above, so below, but as within, so without. So essentially everything external that we perceive, physical objects that you touch or whatever, including our body, they arise from a certain types of geometry. There's shapes, like I said. There's like really basic shapes like this one here, the tetrahedron, and and then we have a square, and we have like a sphere. Now, interesting thing about the sphere and the square. Now, there's no paradigm about like how does he square the circle or something. Now, it turns out that the right size circle will fit right into the square. In the same way with the right size circle will fit right around this square, this cube. So from the top to the bottom, from microcosm to macrocosm, there's relational aspects to everything that exists, including atomic structure. We know there, scientists say there's crystalline structure and shapes of atoms and so on. So what happens is you have the static shapes, and then you discover that, what about the energy factor? See, a shape comes from an energy. For example, you people know about cymatics, where there's a vibration and it creates a shape on a three-dimensional, on a plate, for example. Now, there are sound shapes, you might say, that make the materials. The vibration of sound will cause cells to divide and keep them going and humming. Basically, there's a humming in the universe because there's chemistry, like there's a positive and a negative, and then there's a result. So even in cellular activity, you have a membrane, you have osmosis, you have different kinds of chemical reactions that are based on positive and negative, and how they attract and how they combine. And when they combine, when on a chemical level, on a really essential level, in a chemistry class, you get these little kits and you put these little atoms together, and sound and vibration and energy creates the shapes. And then you have the shapes, you have the very basic shapes. And essentially, everything in the universe is a bunch of Lego blocks. I mean, it's shaped, it's built on a bunch of different shapes. And even in modern computers, the way they do some, for example, in the flight simulator behind me, the way they model scenery and so on, they get down to the fractal level, and like, okay, you know what fractals are? There's self-symmetry. Now, self-symmetry is a very profound principle in nature, you see, and also in the inner dimension. That's why, again, I keep relating to the inner and the outer. Within our own being, which we exist, the mystics say that the mystery of our own being is extremely simple, because it's, for example, you look at a mirror, and a mirror reflects back to you something, and for example, in this case, it's only just a body. We see typically only a body when we look at a mirror, and we don't see the aura or whatever, but our own concepts of ourself are overlaid on what we see in the mirror, you see. But someone else who might look at our picture, for example, they see totally different because they pick up on different cues or their own concepts and so on. So there's a conflict between our self-constructed identity and what other people perceive of us and what's out there. So a technique of meditation and so on, and even for a scientist, is to have a neutral, open, non-judgmental point of view, non-reactive to, okay, I'm going to use my best possible observation with the best possible tools, and I'm not going to have a preconceived notion of what I observe, you see. And that's how science has progressed, okay? As long as we keep that openness, we're going to be progressing in science. Now, ultimately, even some of the greatest physicists have come to the point where, okay, they get down to finer points of atoms, and, okay, what are we dealing with here? We're talking about energy, we're talking about little sparks of matter and little particles that exist for like a billionth of a second or whatever. What are we talking about here? There's something extremely subtle. And if you ever start believing that the subtle things don't affect the great big things, then try saying that to the electricity in your body, or the chemical actions that are going on constantly to make you alive. It's all happening automatically because of some intensity. Now, in terms of the physics of things, we're talking about, ultimately, the metaphysics of cosmic science was basically saying that, okay, we have, like, let's say you call about the soil. The soil of the universe, let's talk about really rich soil. It's humid, it's got every different element in it, it can produce any kind of plant and wants to grow there. That's the essence of the cosmos for us. And there's a substance, you might say, that in the Hindu tradition they call it Kali. It's just like the profound blackness, the ultimate nihilistic, everything is just all in one or nothing. It's just completely the incomprehensible blackness of space. From that root, from that very root of soil, you might say, everything arises. So the intellectual thinkers and scientists and cosmic scientists, the esoteric types, started reasoning within themselves, that exploring, well, what's within, what's out, and the consciousness sits on this horse, you might say, and can observe. The body can move or not move. The horse you can walk the horse or not walk the horse. You can be on the horse or not on the horse. But your consciousness, your identity, your awareness has an independent function than the vehicle that you're in. And that's a hard thing for a lot of people to understand. But once we understand that, like for example, psychologists, they know people dream, and you're lying there in your body and you're just sitting there and nothing, your body's not moving, and in your dream you're flying around, you're going to places, you're doing stuff and having fun or whatever, and then you get back in the body. So what's all that about? There's a root of consciousness, as I said, that goes all the way down to the subatomic level, and that's what the ancients are aiming for. So basically, you can't separate the cosmos and activity and what we perceive from your own existence. There's a consciousness there. So once we get into that neutral position, then we can start understanding how this cosmos really works. So in terms of the wave vibration, again, many scientists have said this: the vibration, the ohm, the cosmic sound. If you think about a sound that has envelops a, there's certain kinds of sounds that are so complex that all potential is in them. You might say, okay. In the same way that a sound creates a flower, sound creates cell division, sound creates all those things because of its vibration, and sound affects our body, goes through the water in our body, and through the bones in our body, and in the womb, an infant is hearing the inner sound and feeling the pulse of the mother and feeling the vibration. When we investigate real science in the modern world, ideally each scientist should be in a cosmic tune with the breath of life, the energy, and not objectify everything, because the experiments that the scientists said, double slit experience or whatever, and if your awareness or your perception affects the outcome of an experiment or something, because a lot of modern scientists don't grasp the fact that our consciousness has a root in and is linked in everything, and that's what the sages have said. And the only way you're going to find that out is to sit still for a while. And a lot of even young people, children, there are people who've had accidents, they've gone into another space, they realize, well, what my being is a lot more than this body. You see? Now, once we have the understanding, we start to look at everything in creation a little differently, and how there are certain frequencies, you might say, in ratios. We know the phi ratio and so on. The pi is an infinite and expanding, and there's certain frequencies that seem to appear over and over again in life forms and the star formation in flowers or the hexagon, and there's all different shapes. And these shapes go all the way down, and again, back into our own being. Within the chemistry of our own body, there is those shapes, there is a chemistry, we know that medical medicines that are given to us, they look at the way the atoms are shaped, and all kinds of chemistry, the way it affects our body, the shape of the atoms that we may ingest or take in. All that complex chemistry has a lot to do with vibration and shape. So if we change our own vibration deliberately by exposing ourselves to different activities and harmonies and music and so on, then there's the flower of our being becomes different. Just like when you change the frequency on cymatics, you'll change the whole shape of something by changing our vibration, by tuning that one perception. That's why music can be so powerful, because we turn for a moment our perception on something harmonious. Now, if we do that on a regular basis with something within, the breath of life that's keeping us alive, then all our other perceptions will be a lot more clear. Now, in terms of the esoteric physics, again, understanding that the consciousness plays a role in everything that goes on here. And once we understand that basic, then we can look into science in a very different way, that we are more of a participant. And we can start using, for example, people know about so-called magic and different kinds of intention. It's a reality that if we generate our thought process in a certain manner, especially if we have some concentration, if we have some harmony in it and some regularity, some cyclical rhythm to our behavior, then we can manifest all kinds of amazing things. And we know from history that there's scientists and musicians and all kinds of people who have demonstrated that the human body has all this potential. We need to apply that potential in our scientific investigation, no matter what level we're on, including our psychological investigation of other people's behavior and so on. And that's another subject. I talk about esoteric psychology. When there's a saying in the Upanishads that when you understand one thing made of gold, you understand everything made of gold. The shape has changed. There's a lot of different shapes of gold, but the gold is the gold. See, the same way there's an essence of our own being and our own awareness that doesn't mutate. It's untarnishable. But we can know that experience, and sages have told us about that, and we generally are not taught that in elementary school. It should be the first lesson we learn when we're young. Say, by the way, before you start your regular school, let's teach you a few things about you. And that unfortunately doesn't happen. So I put my 2 cents out there and talk about this kind of stuff. Science, again, any kind of science that we get into, geology, archaeology, physics, astrophysics, there are certain principles that the teachers of the ancients said to us that, look, at least first of all, have a very, very open mind, drop some of your concepts, and be willing to try to grasp a little bit of infinity here. And then, if you can be that open and have no reaction, then you can start to get an inflow, because ultimately the answers ultimately get resolved within our own being, because every cosmic answer is found in our own, the chemistry of our own body and the atomic energy of our own body and all that. There's a as above, so below, as inward is how we're a microcosm. We can understand our awareness, and if we understand our awareness, then we can understand a lot of other things that will answer a lot of questions. So, again, I'm not a scientist, but I talk about polarity, for example. I talk about the interaction of forces, and there's many different principles. For example, let's give a few here in science. There's more membranes. When 2 types of materials meet, like in a cell wall, there's osmosis, there's chemical reaction, that's one principle. Okay, there's a principle of increase. For example, generation. There's in a waveform, there's an attack phase where something starts, a process starts, and there's a pulse. And then there's a pulse, and then there's a sustain portion. Okay, that's the operation. You have, even in music, you have a pulse, and then you have a sustain, and then you have a drop. And in square waves, it's like a pulse, and then there's a steady state, and then it drops. In nature, it tends to go in analog form. So you have a steady rise and a growth, and then you have a peak, and then you have like a slow drop. And a lot of different kinds of materials and plant growth and processes in the earth go through various types of analog cycles. And at the same time, you also have things inside the earth, for example, when every once in a while some pressure or some energy is released, and you have like an earthquake, and it's just like bang, there's a big pulse, and like boom, and then there's a pulse, and then there's an aftershock, and there's a bunch of like trailing vibration. And basically what the earth is speaking, and it's relieving certain pressures in certain areas. And frankly, if you know where the earth releases those pressures, you might not want to live there. It's just pretty common sense. It may really look good over the San Francisco Bay, but one of these days there's going to be one of those pulses that you won't be able to stop. So the bottom line is the esoteric principles. Like, for example, when scientists analyze a wave, I did some electronic study, and in many different fields of science, they analyze wave functions, a pulse. So you can say, for example, when I speak, there's going to be some wave function, and if someone analyzes that, they can see that, well, he had some ups and downs, and there were some pulses, you might say, and some whatever. The same way with everything in nature. There's earth, and there's rivers, and there's all kinds of activities that go on that make pulses, and they have an energy waveform, and those waveforms are decipherable. You analyze them and say, well, if it's something steady and smooth and rhythmic and so on, okay, that's not as bad. But if it's something like all of a sudden, like an earthquake and this boom, you might want to keep an eye on that stuff. Like La Palma Island over the west coast of Africa. If that goes one day, you won't get much warning. You better be away from the coastline on the east coast of the United States when that happens. So there's a lot of mystical thinking, you might say, of inward thinking, because like I said, inwardly there are pulses, you might say, our senses react to something, and then you can put a little sensor on your skin or something. It's like, well, you know, your body's reacting, your mind might be reacting or something. So, by understanding that as above, so below, as without, so within, there's an awareness to keep track of, keep track of our own mental activity to some degree as an observer. For example, the horse and the rider. The rider keeps an eye on the horse and what's the horse going to do next, and make sure it's all calm and everything. We can manage our ups and downs by some neutral observation, and that will help us at every single activity and every kind of science and investigation that we have. By having that neutral observation point, which is our true nature, basically we're observing from the core. And one final point is the main thing that the ancients teach, that to understand nature, we need the techniques that bring the bridge from our physical senses clearly all the way through some of the higher elevated physical senses as we refine our body and our physical senses get better, but connected to the inner hearing, the inner sight, the inner taste, the inner feeling and perception, that the same being that is alive in dreams and exploring and doing all these things is right now conscious and right now with you, with us, while we're here physically. So that little clue here helps us understand that we can be in a lot of more dimensions of our own space and still be very coherent in every dimension. So this is, again, a little bit of a thing I've discovered over the years, and I try to make these videos short so they're not too long and boring, but please like and share. I try to be very casual here. What's my authority? I have nobody here, just an investigator, accumulator of information. I share and put my 2 cents out there. I have some unique experience in my life that I think might be some relevant to some people. And again, thank you for listening, and hope to see you in one of my other videos.